Thunder split the evening like a bone cracking in heaven. The sound rolled across the prairie, scattering crows and waking every echo of loneliness that ever lived in a man's chest. Cole Avery rode through it, hat pulled low, coat drenched and heavy. The horse beneath him fought the wind, its breath white and ragged. There was no sign of the sun anymore, only bruised clouds and the kind of silence that waits before something breaks. He had not spoken to another soul in weeks. The nearest town was 3 days behind him, a place that smelled of whiskey and half-spent dreams. Out here, there was only the land and whatever ghosts a man carried. He thought he'd left his behind. But the wind tonight sounded like a woman crying, and that sound tugged at something old, something half-forgotten. When he saw the shape by the river, he thought it a mirage. Lightning flashed once, enough to paint her in silver light before the darkness swallowed her again. A body, half-drowned, face turned toward the storm. Cole dismounted, boots sinking into wet earth. She was breathing, faint but steady. Her dress clung to her like memory, turquoise, stitched with beads dulled by mud and rain. One arm twisted awkwardly beneath her, the other clutching a small leather pouch to her chest as if guarding the last piece of her life. He lifted her carefully. She was light, yet the weight of her meant something he didn't have a word for. She murmured in her sleep, a language he didn't know but felt in his bones. Words of prayer, maybe. Or farewell. The storm tightened its grip. Cole carried her toward an old cabin he'd seen a mile back, half swallowed by willow trees. The horse followed, hooves sucking at the wet ground. Inside, the air smelled of rot and cedar. He laid her near the cold hearth, struck a match, and coaxed flame from damp kindling until a small fire trembled to life. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. Brown, deep as the earth after rain. She looked at him like one might look at a stranger whose kindness could cost them both. He reached for a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. "You fell," he said softly. "The river nearly took you." Her gaze didn't waver. She spoke his name though he hadn't given it, her voice rough but certain. Then she looked toward the door, toward the thunder. "They will come," she whispered. Cole frowned. "Who?" She closed her eyes again, too weak to answer. He didn't press her. He'd learned that some truths arrived when the night grew quiet enough. He cleaned the wound on her arm, long and shallow, likely from a fall on the rocks. As he worked, he noticed the small tokens sewn into her dress. Shells, feathers, beads of bone. Each told a story he couldn't read but somehow understood. She wasn't just anyone. She was someone's daughter, someone's promise. Hours passed. The fire grew steady. Outside, rain softened to mist. He sat across from her, staring at the flames, wondering what chain of fate had placed her here, in his hands, beneath this wounded sky. When she woke again, the first light of dawn had begun to wash the room pale. She tried to rise. He caught her by the shoulders. "You need rest," he said. She shook her head. "No rest. Not safe." The words hung between them like a knife in the air. Her eyes darted to the window, where distant movement rippled through the grass. Shapes too large to be deer. Riders. Cole's hand moved instinctively to his rifle leaning against the wall. "You expecting company?" Her voice was barely a breath. "My people." That gave him pause. He'd heard enough stories to know how this could end. A white man with an injured native woman under his roof. It could be taken for a crime, even if mercy was all that bound them. He stood, shoulders tightening beneath the weight of what he didn't understand. Then she said something else, softer this time, as if confessing to the fire itself. "I am Ayana, daughter of Chief Wakasa." The name hung like thunder after lightning. Cole had heard it before. Tales whispered in saloons of a Lakota leader whose wrath was legend, whose daughter was a spirit of the plains, untouchable and proud. And now she was here, wrapped in his blanket, alive because he'd lifted her from a river she wasn't meant to die in. The riders grew clearer through the mist. Spears glinted. Hooves pounded. Cole stepped to the doorway, rifle in hand, heart beating like the storm had never stopped. He turned once, just long enough to see her watching him, fear and gratitude braided together in her eyes. "Stay back," he told her. "I don't know what they mean to do." Ayana's lips parted, her voice breaking like the dawn itself. "They mean to repay the debt," she whispered. "But not in the way you think." Then the riders emerged from the fog, 12 of them, faces painted, silent as the wind. Cole raised the rifle, the firelight flickering against his jaw. And as the first warrior dismounted, the world seemed to hold its breath, caught between the echo of what he had done and the unknown price of what was coming next. The sound of hooves struck like gunfire against the wet earth. The cabin walls trembled as the riders surrounded it, their shadows spilling through the cracks like smoke. Cole stood still, rifle leveled, rain dripping from his hat brim. Ayana sat upright by the fire, face pale, lips pressed tight as the door creaked open. The first man to enter wore the silence of command. His hair was streaked with silver, his gaze sharp enough to cut through distance and lie. He carried no weapon, yet every breath around him obeyed. Ayana's whisper broke the air. "Father." Cole lowered his gun a fraction. The chief's eyes passed over him, measuring not just the man but the space he filled in the room, the heat he had given his daughter, the danger his kindness might have become. He stepped closer to Ayana, touched her shoulder, then turned to Cole. "You carried her from the river. You brought her back from the storm." His voice was steady, low. "A debt such as that cannot be left unanswered." Cole said nothing. Words in this moment would only make the ground softer underfoot. The chief motioned, and 2 riders entered carrying furs and blankets, laying them before the fire in offering. Cole shook his head. "I don't want payment," he said quietly. "I did what any man ought to do." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, as if the simplicity of that truth was harder to believe than deceit. He moved closer, his voice like a drumbeat. "Then take not gold but bond. The one who saves my daughter's life must protect it as his own. It is the old way. You will take her hand." Ayana rose, unsteady but fierce. "No," she said, the single word slicing through the smoky air. Her father turned to her. His authority cracked for just a breath, replaced by something that might have been fear. "You would shame the old law?" "I would not be traded like meat," she said. "My life is my own, even if it was saved." Cole looked between them, caught in the space where 2 worlds collided. He had heard of such customs, though never seen them. Marriage as gratitude. Union as debt. His stomach twisted. He had lived long enough to know that love born from obligation was just another kind of captivity. He stepped forward, lowering the rifle entirely. "Chief, I meant no disrespect. I just couldn't leave her there. That's all." The older man studied him. His eyes were sharp but not cruel, reflecting the firelight with something that almost looked like pity. "You speak like one who has lost much." Cole didn't deny it. There had been a wife once, years and storms ago. Fever had taken her in a night. He'd buried her alone, marked the grave with a broken horseshoe. Since then, every kindness he gave the world was payment on a debt he could never repay. Ayana's gaze softened. She saw in him what few ever did, the quiet ache of a man who no longer expected redemption but still offered it freely. She stepped closer. "If the law must bind me, let it be my choice who it binds me to." Her father's expression changed, the lines of his face deepening with something between pride and sorrow. He turned to his people, speaking words in Lakota that rolled like thunder through the cabin. Some nodded, others looked away. Finally, he faced Cole again. "The choice is hers. But know this, cowboy, our ways remember. If you walk from her now, the wind itself will bear witness." Cole met Ayana's eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain whispered against the roof. The fire hissed softly, and the world seemed to slow until only the sound of their breathing remained. He wanted to tell her he wasn't the kind of man a woman should tie her life to, that he carried more ruin than hope. But she looked at him as if she already knew. Then a sound cut through the silence, a distant gunshot, faint but clear, echoing from the direction of the valley. Every head turned. One of the riders burst through the doorway, shouting in their tongue. Cole couldn't understand the words, but the fear in them was plain. The chief's expression hardened. "Soldiers," he said. "White men. They come this way." Ayana's face went pale. Her father barked orders, horses stirred, men mounted. He turned once more to Cole. "You ride with us," he said. "You helped one of ours. Now you share her fate." Cole hesitated, only a breath before nodding. The world outside was chaos, rain, thunder, the trembling breath of fear, but in Ayana's eyes, he found something steady. Trust, fragile but real. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling, the smallest act of courage in a world built on vengeance. As they stepped into the storm, she whispered close enough for only him to hear. "Maybe fate doesn't ask what we want, only who we become when it finds us." He looked back at the cabin once more, firelight flickering in the doorway, a fragile heartbeat against the dark. Then he mounted his horse beside her, the thunder swallowing every word that might have followed. Behind them, the wind carried the cry of a hawk and the distant crack of gunfire, two sounds that promised the same thing. The peace they had known, brief as breath, was already gone.